Hey friends, Crystal here from Homemaking on the Homestead, and welcome to my channel. Today's video, I am going to be talking about homeschooling and curriculum. I've had a lot of questions over time about homeschooling, as those who know that I was a homeschooling mom of 8 children, and I homeschooled them all the way from kindergarten all the way through high school. And I had gotten a question recently that a woman asking me, Mia, had asked me about raising a large family and homeschooling. She felt like the Lord was drawing her to that. And I answered that in one big video that ended up being way too long, and so I cut it into 2. So my last video, I talked about the large family, raising my large family and life as a mother of many. And this video is a continuation where I will be talking about the homeschooling aspect and sharing some of my thoughts on curriculum and just overall my years of homeschooling. So it's going to pick up where the other one left off. And you can see in the background I was baking cookies and doing things that day. Today I'm working on dinner plans here that I got to get going. Okay, let's move on to today's video. Now on the homeschooling, that kind of just fell into my lap. So my son was about 2, I think. So he was born in 1982, so it would have been 1984. And I was watching a show called The 700 Club, which is a Christian show. And there was a guest speaker that day on the show. His name was Dr. Raymond Moore. I don't know how many of you out there are familiar with Dr. Moore, but he was he's considered like a pioneer in the homeschooling movement. And it was actually very eye-opening to me. I had never even heard of anything like this. And in the early 80s, this was before homeschooling was even really a thing. There were still some states where it was illegal to homeschool. That was the most common question that I had back then when people would meet me and find out I homeschooled. They would be, is that legal? Can you actually do that? So it was very new. But at that moment, the whole concept of homeschooling really just clicked with me. I really felt like I had stumbled upon something that was just this obvious message from the Lord that this is where we were going in our life. And Dr. Moore has written many books. I purchased his book, Homespun Schools, very encouraging book. There were very few homeschooling books actually out there at that time. And the other one was Better Late Than Early. Both of them had tons of information for me, but it was probably just my personality. I knew no one else that homeschooled. There were no homeschool groups around at that time that I was aware of, at least. I had no outside support from this. My husband thought it was a great idea, and we were pretty much like, let's give this a try. So I waited until my son was about 5, and then I ordered a little curriculum. Mary Pride again had written a book, the Big Book of Curriculum or something like that. Gave catalogs and things like that. There was very few resources available, but I picked and was able to get some that worked for me. The first thing that I have to say is that I absolutely loved homeschooling. So I ended up homeschooling all 8 of my children from kindergarten all the way through high school. I even helped them beyond that as they went for degrees and things like that. I had 2 of my daughters get their college degrees non-traditionally, which would be a whole nother video. But I, was driving them all around for tests and helping them out. And so I loved the whole process of homeschooling, and I would do that all over again. I've had questions on what kind of curriculum I would recommend and what would I use. I have to tell you that I have been out of the loop for a long time. Like I said, my youngest is 24. He graduated when he was 17. So it's been several years since I've really been into the whole curriculum. There's a lot out there nowadays. In fact, there's an overwhelming amount out there. But when I developed kind of my philosophy for homeschooling and my philosophy for curriculum, I narrowed down to what was the most important thing that I wanted to pass on to my children. So the number one was reading. I wanted them to read, I wanted them to be good readers, and I wanted them to read a lot of books. I focused on classic books because I felt like they were the most enriching type of books to read. The language, the being able to, classic books can sometimes be a challenge to read. So the language, all aspects of a classic book that can retain a child's attention and, help him to grow in his education. There is so much to be said for reading that it pales in comparison to workbooks and textbooks and things that just are nauseating to continually work with sometimes. But I wanted them to be able to write well, and I wanted them to be able to do math very well. And so that was my basic criteria. And I've had people over the years ask me, well, how can you teach your children all these, like upper grade science and upper grade things? What if your child has an interest in this or that? How do you support that, and how are you able to do that if you don't know how those things? And my answer to that is very simple. It's you give your children the tools necessary to be able to learn. You give them a desire to learn and to want to have more information and to explore the world around them and explore topics of interest. And you allow them to go out into the world and get what they want and pursue the direction that they want to go. As long as they have the tools, they are able to do that. As my kids entered their teenage years, I tried to hone in on the things that they had a passion for, the things that interested them, and provide opportunities for them to explore that on their own and make their own choices in those things, rather than being tied down to a full-bore high school type curriculum. I did add in some things that were necessary. Overall, for the majority of my homeschooling years, I used ACE as my curriculum, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's a self-teaching curriculum. It has little workbooks that are called PACEs, and they have individual subjects, all the subjects, and your kids work through those for each year. That worked with my organized mind, but overall I wasn't necessarily really happy with it, only because I felt like there was so much more in life for my kids to be able to do and experience than to be tied down to these books. When I got to my youngest 3 children, I switched over to Robinson curriculum, and that is a very different curriculum, if anybody is familiar with that, and it focused on reading classic books, on writing and math skills, and that fit right in with where my desires were. However, I kept battling the famous homeschooling mother thing, and I'm sure you guys can relate to this if you've homeschooled your children or you're currently homeschooling your children, is it enough? Did I do enough? Is it covering enough? Are they going to be prepared, and that type of stuff? So then I would always end up going back to curriculum and then back to the Robinson curriculum. When I look at where my children are today, I would have to say that a curriculum like the Robinson curriculum is actually enough. It gives your children the foundation that they need to then explore so many other topics. My children, I tested them every year as according to Washington state law, and my children excelled all the time. Their scores were off the charts. And, I think that it was also at a period of time where life didn't have as many distractions. We didn't have video games. We didn't have computer type stuff for them to be drawn to as much. I kept TV to a minimum. We didn't even have TV reception. So things like movies were a family weekend a fun thing to do. So they didn't have the distractions. So what they had was farm life. They had their books to read. They had Awanas and youth group and things like that to look forward to. But that was pretty much their whole lifestyle. Today, my kids have pursued their own interests. They are all doing very well. I have 2 of my kids are computer programmers. I have one that is an auditor that works for the state. I have another daughter that's a teacher, and she teaches special ed children. I have some homeschooling moms in that group. I have 2 of my kids were in the military. Some of this overlaps because they did military, then they pursued their careers. One of my children is a manager for a large grocery store. So they have pursued the things that have interested them, and they enjoy what they do today. And so I'd have to say the homeschooling was a success. They got what they needed. But again, I would just always go back to those 3 main things. Have them read classic books. Take away the distractions. Let their mind be expanded by the stories in the books and the writing styles. Let them play. Let them use their imagination. I think that is sorely lacking today in so many ways. All of my children could write well, and I go back to the books on that one. And all of my children did amazing in math. They all went through all the way up to advanced math with Saxon, and some of them even did the calculus books with Saxon. So they all had a good, which I think math teaches logic and helps them with thinking. So that is what I would say today, is that it's probably easier than we tend to make it out to be. With so many curriculum choices, it's really easy to get overwhelmed and constantly have that fear of whether you're doing enough for them or not. But you teach them the basics, you expand their minds, you give them a love for learning, and help them pursue their passions. I think that, to me, is what I have walked away with after 37 years of homeschooling. Is those are what are the main things. Well, I hope you found this video to be helpful if you're a homeschooling mom and you had any thoughts or questions as I shared my experiences and my conclusions at the end of it all. And if you have any more questions, please feel free to put them below. And if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. That really helps me. And I would do more videos on homeschooling or large families, either one, if people had an interest or there were any questions. Mostly on my channel I talk about life now as an empty nest mom, and my husband's retired, and so that's kind of where my life is today. But I certainly don't mind sharing about my life and my experiences in the past. So, all right, you guys, I will see you all in my next video. Bye-bye.